this garbage patch and you sort of take a bite to eat, there's 180 times larger chance that you eat plastic rather than a piece of plankton, right? So, and what we found was that this concentration is so high that it can actually have this chemical impact, where these chemicals have a potential health impact on these organisms as well as species further up the food web, including us humans.
So, have we noticed that? Have people been tested and shown to have ingested plastic that they've gotten through eating tuna or something like that?
So the plastic itself isn't the thing that...
The chemicals.
So it's chemicals that attach to the plastic. And for example, what you see is that, for example, in Greenland, like the native communities that really rely on fish, they have much higher cancer rates. They have much higher concentrations of mercury, so other heavy metals, as well as these persistent organic pollutants, these things that attach to the plastic.
In Greenland?
These native communities that rely on fish and other sea life to eat. This
is a recent trend that they have higher rates of cancer?
I don't know how recent it is, but probably in the past few decades, I can imagine. But that's really linked to their marine, their consumption of marine sources. But obviously, it's hard to say. Well, how many percent of that is just
heavy metals?
Versus what's coming by plastic. But sure, if you look at the kind of chemicals and you look at the lab tests that they've done with that, those chemicals, they are not very good for you.
Now, I've heard that if you leave a water bottle like this in your car and it gets hot out, that the water will plastic will leach into the water. Is that correct?
Yeah. So I think it depends on the kind of plastic, but you have, I think with this, you probably have a liner would contain like phthalates and things like that. So, I wouldn't do that. So there's, when you look at those chemicals, you have two kinds of things you should, I think, worry about. One is the chemicals that are actually in the plastic. And secondly, there's these chemicals that just float around in the ocean and then can attach to the plastic when they, because they sort of act like this chemical sponge. The plastic wants to repel water and those chemicals too, so they kind of act like a magnet towards each other. And especially the latter one, it's well studied, and we see that a lot on the plastic. But the former one, it's even an issue here if in your car, for example.
It's an issue in your car? Like how so?
Yeah, well, if you leave it like in a hot car.
Right. Now, my question was, even if you're scooping out all that plastic out of the ocean, is it still leaving chemicals that we'll never be able to get out?
So I think the chemicals mostly, actually it collects more chemicals than it sort of leaches out. So because of those sort of legacy chemicals like the PCBs and DDT, so those things that we used for insulators and pesticides back in maybe the 40s to 60s. So these actually, the plastic attracts those chemicals. So in a way, you kind of also remove a bit of those chemicals. And we actually have to wash them out before we do the recycling because you don't want those in your products.
So there's actually some sort of a benefit to having those plastics in the water? I mean, that you would encourage people to put plastic in the water, but there is some natural benefit?
It's sort of, I cannot really say how many % of those legacy chemicals we would be pulling out with the plastic. But you could argue it's sort of an added benefit to removing it, not to having plastic in the ocean.
Right.
I would say.
Now, have you extended this line of thinking to some of the other problems in the ocean, like these heavy metals?
What I really hope is that the ocean cleanup can sort of become a symbol of how we should use technology to solve problems of our time. So when you, and I think a lot of it comes down to that we shouldn't sort of protest what we shouldn't agree with, but we should build we should build a future that we do agree with. So when you look at the past few hundred years of modernity and our civilization, what we see is dramatic positive trends in terms of health, wealth, education, violence. I mean, it's even pinker on your show, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's really, really positive trends, and we've done a good job in that. And that all comes down to our ability to sort of imagine things that don't exist yet, so sort of technology and innovation, and being able to work together in an effective way, which is think about the corporation. So I think those have been sort of very good trends, and I think what we should do is we should also think about how to apply those to the area outside of our own species and to the rest of the environment. Because when you look at all those positive trends over the past few hundred years, and then that's all good, but there's one very big exception, which is the impact to the environment. It's almost like we've had all the success at the cost of the environment, but I think that instead of, and there are some people that have sort of a more reactionary feel to this, and they say, well, look at all these problems. It was created by businesses and by technology, so we should stay as far away from those things as possible. And I think that's sort of, that's sort of stupid. I think that it really just shows that these are very powerful ways of getting things done. And I think a much more effective way was to sort of apply that what has worked in other areas, and then also apply that to the area of the environment. So I don't think, I for example think that the car problem is not going to be solved by banning cars. I think it's going to be solved by electric cars. And I don't think the meat pollution problem is going to be solved by everyone becoming vegan. I think it's going to be solved by things like lab-grown meat and other kind of alternatives. And that's why I also think that the ocean cleanup or the plastic pollution problem is not going to be solved by sort of people trying to do their own little bit and trying to live without plastic or things like that. I think it's going to be solved by things like plastics that do not harm to the environment, as well as technologies like the ocean cleanup to sort of clean up after ourselves. So